look, very much as you guided the market, sales at 17.2 billion. I'm drawn to the order intake, 4%, and a double-digit growth in diagnostic treatment business. Frans, the question on everybody's mind is, we know the headwinds, but is the worst behind you now?
I wish I could say that, Manus, but let's indeed unpack all the events a bit. We are continuing to see very strong order growth at Philips. In fact, the order book at the end of 2021 is 18% higher than the prior year. So we have a lot of customers waiting for installations for hospital care and patient care, which I think is also understandable given what the world is facing with the backlog of treatments and, of course, the COVID demand. So we are very keen to supply more of our innovations to help all those customers. Now, at the same time, all the supply chain headwinds continue. Partly it's the shortage of components by chip makers, and partly it's also the shipping that continues to have delay. And maybe I'll give you an example of one of those shipping delay issues. We had a boat with a lot of batteries coming out of Asia into the United States, and that boat took just a whole month longer than originally anticipated, causing our ultrasound machines being unable to be delivered to hospitals. Right? That is how the shipping industry really affects healthcare, and that's not a good thing. In the semiconductor world, yeah, exactly. In the semiconductor world, we see very little visibility, even though we give out orders at least a year in advance. You know, you could have decommitments during the quarter, which makes it very hard to be predictable. And there was, of course, disappointment in the quarter because we had a lot more supply chain headwinds than originally guided for, and that's not great. Now, in 2022, we expect a gradual improvement through the year, but certainly in the first few quarters, we still have shortages.
Frans, if I can just jump in here, because I know when you first warned about this a few weeks back, you talked about that some of the chip shortages means you have to go in, do spot buys, means prices are also going through the roof. This is a question that we've been asking a lot of our executives for really the past year, but given the necessity to buy in the spot market, how much of these high prices are you passing on to customers, have you been, and do you expect to throughout the next year?
Yeah, much of our order book, of course, is based on prices from last year. So it will take some time before the higher cost will ripple through into the market and towards consumers and hospitals. But it's inevitable that some of these higher costs will have to be passed on to the market and to the customers. And I would say that will start to be visible in the course of 2022.
Frans, just on that, as Danny say, your language where you talk about this price ratcheting higher, it's going through the roof in terms of chips. It sounds like you wish you could bring us better news, but you don't have any better news on the chip outlook. So do you expect chip prices to rise by 10%, 20%? What is your best case scenario given the constriction in supply?
Well, the spot buying is really for the open market where you try to scramble and get more chips, and then you can see, you know, even tenfold increase sometimes. The regular supply is a little bit less exposed to that kind of price increases. And then when we talk about shipping, we have seen shipping and container shipping prices increase by a factor of 3. And so it's inevitable that some of that will have to be priced through towards the end markets. I do hope that as more capacity becomes available, that in the course of 2022, we see the situation abate. We certainly expect much better growth in the second half year. I mentioned to you earlier that we have an all-time high order book. It's 18% higher than at the end of 2020. So our innovations are well liked. We have continued to be able to get a lot of long-term strategic partnerships with hospitals as hospitals are keen to improve their patient care, their productivity, their health outcomes, and they want to partner with Philips for that. So we are working very hard to ameliorate the situation, and I expect improvement in the course of 2022.
Frans, what sort of visibility do you have on your order book, given that it's at an all-time high? Are your expectations that you are near the peak here with a lot of that demand brought forward, or do you expect it to grow even more significantly?
We expect further good growth as you see hospitals looking at a big backlog of elective procedures in cardiac care, in cancer care. There's more ambulatory surgical centers being built. We see more demand for diagnosis. Our diagnosis and treatment business through the year, last year grew high single digit. We expect this kind of growth to be possible also in 2022. Also in Europe, in Asia, we see good demand. So I am positive about the market outlook from a demand point of view. It's just that we need to get a better handle on being able to deliver, and I expect that to gradually improve through the year.
Frans, that gradual improvement in the year, it draws me to the zero COVID policy from China. Your outlook, how inextricably linked is the outlook that you're giving to Danny and I linked to an easing in zero COVID policy in China and Asia more broadly? Is that the source of unlocking the uplift for you?
Well, this is a very important question, Manus. Supply chains are global. The interdependency is very, very high. And I am worried about, let's say, COVID resurgence in China. While the Western world starts to become more, let's say, accustomed to flare-ups, in China, this can still have a massive impact if a city with a harbor, for example, gets into lockdown. Right? So there are certainly supply chain risk linked to potential COVID outbreaks in China. And the question is, of course, whether a zero COVID strategy is maintainable over time.
Frans, before we let you go, I do have to ask about your respiratory machines, the recall there with the sleep apnea devices. Of course, this is something that you flagged previously, saying that this would lead to higher provisions due to the recall. But when it comes to legal action taken from Philips customers to the company, what is the timeline on clarity you'll have for that and its addition to higher provisions? Is that Q2, 3, 4? When might we have an idea of those costs?
Well, let's first spend a minute to talk about the progress that we are making on the recall. So we have had quite an effective patient reach-out program. So we have reached around 5 million patients. We are working very hard to get them repaired units. In the meantime, we have tripled production. We have 1.5 million units out there already. So we are making progress on that front. The second piece of news came in December, where the gases that are associated with the machines actually were proven to be below the safety norm that the ISO organization sets, which then also reassures physicians and patients in their continued use of the device. Then there was an independent article in the American Journal for Respiratory Care, which demonstrated that the Philips devices versus other brand devices or in fact for sleep apnea patients that use no machine does not show any higher incident level. So again, all of that builds, of course, up into the question that you ask, how do we look at litigation? Now, it will take time before we can, let's say, fully understand the situation out there. And probably you should come back and ask me that question at the end of the year or perhaps in 2023.